How are you guys? Good? Managing, it feels like. It's just from the vibe of the room, managing. It's like a week before Christmas, and all of you are looking at the title of that sermon and saying, I have no idea what that means. What is a plaid camel and how much does it cost? It is a reference to the fact that Tesla has their kind of top-of-the-line model they call Plaid. And that the fastest version of the Tesla, it can go into what they call Plaid mode, which is this silly reference to a comedy movie, a Mel Brooks movie. That's all an aside. But I do want to talk about Tesla for a second, because when we moved here, Gabe and I played this game called Count the Teslas. Maybe you played this game too. Maybe you didn't. It's fine. It's okay. It's a very easy game to learn. We live about 6 miles from the church. It's about 12 minutes with traffic. And when we moved here, we were surprised. Gabe said, Dad, I saw 2 Teslas on the way to church the other day. And I said, wow. And then I called him on the way home, and I said, Gabe, you'll never believe it. I didn't call him like this. I called him with my hands free. I said, Gabe, you will never believe it. I just saw 4 Teslas on the way home, and I'm not even home yet. And then very quickly, it was 4 and 8 and 10, to the point where the game kind of lost its excitement, that we saw so many of those cars on the road that we were just like, it's not really exotic anymore. This is just kind of, they're all over the place. Now, we played that game for a while, and there's a possibility that in the next couple of months, we are going to play a more specific version of Count the Teslas called, the bonus round, Count the Cybertrucks. Now, if you know what the Cybertruck is, Tesla is introducing this new, what's called a luxury pickup truck. This is not the only luxury pickup truck. In fact, there is a whole line of these vehicles that are called luxury pickup trucks, which, yes, they can put something in the back of the truck. Technically, yes, they can tow things. But if you asked a friend who had one of these pickup trucks, hey, can I throw a whole bunch of cinder blocks in the back of your truck? The answer is not going to be yes. The answer is going to be forget my phone number. Because that's really not what these kinds of pickup trucks are for. More than anything, sure, they're useful, they are a sign of status. They are a sign of a certain economic level that you've reached, that you can afford to splurge on a car that can be up into the 6 figures. It's just one of those things that says, I've arrived. Now, this is silly. In the ancient Near East, camels played a similar role. Camels were the ancient Near Eastern equivalent of the luxury pickup truck. Because yes, they were incredibly useful for hauling goods, and they moved products all around the world, especially through environments that normally horses would kind of get tired in, or they were more dangerous and they were more long hauls. Sure, they were useful, but they were also signs of status. We actually have records from the Roman Empire of how much different animals cost. Oxen, sheep, and horses, and donkeys, all of that. And camels were above all other cattle that you could buy, except for one, a racehorse. Which, the same way now we play Spot the Lamborghini or Spot the Ferrari. Yes, if you bought a racehorse, it today in our technology. It's just kind of the ghost of Christmas showing up. And so these camels in the ancient world, they would have been useful, yes, but they also would have been a sign of status, a sign of importance. Which is why that passage that we just heard Keith read from Isaiah 60, where it talks about the young camels coming from these other countries, and they're loaded up with what? They're loaded up with expensive gifts like gold and frankincense, that even in the ancient world, camels were a sign that you had arrived, that you were elite, that you had some money behind you. And so we're going to read this passage in Matthew's gospel where we hear about these men who come on camels, as Isaiah says. I'm going to read starting at verse 1 through verse 12. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it was written by the prophets. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, by no means are the least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that had been seen when it rose went before them until it came over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child and Mary his mother, and they fell down and they worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Well, the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God endures forever. Let's pray together. Jesus, would you guide us and would you allow us to see what place these wise men had in the story? What place we have in your story today, Lord? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. What I want us to do this morning is really ask a few questions to help us understand specifically what's going on around these wise men, or maybe you've heard them called magi. And the first question that we're going to ask is, who were these magi? Now, if you were reading the passage very quickly, it might be understandable for you if you don't know that much about the Bible to just kind of go past and say, okay, there's a lot of weird stuff that happens at Jesus' birth. The whole thing is kind of odd, and there's angels, and there's prophecies, and then he's supposed to be called one name, and then he's supposed to be called another name, and that name's supposed to mean another name. There's a lot of details that you might not understand. And so if you just heard, okay, these wise men come, they give him these expensive and odd gifts. We understand that if you get gold for Christmas, it's a big deal. But frankincense and myrrh, that seems, are those socks? Like we don't understand kind of culturally what they are. So it would be fair for you to say, what's going on with these magi? Now, if though you had grown up around the Old Testament the way that the first people who received Matthew's gospel did, you would have understood that there's something really significant about these magi. When I was in high school, I won a contest that you had to call into the local radio station and give the right answer. Now, for reference for some folks, right before Spotify and before iTunes and before, satellite radio, there was just radio. Maybe some of you remember this. And I called in because there was this contest where they said, okay, we're going to play 2 seconds of a song. And you only get the first 2 seconds of the song, and you have to guess the song based simply on those 2 seconds. And if you guess right and you call in, you can win tickets. And I did. I won. I do not remember the tickets I won. I do not remember the song that I won them to. The only thing I remember is that I actually didn't go to the concert for some reason. Gus and Gabe are not in here, and they were in the first service, so I'll give you this detail. I'm pretty sure I was grounded. That was the reason why I didn't go to the show. But if you were a Jewish person reading and you just heard the 2 seconds, these magi showed up, these wise men showed up, you would be able to guess the song. You would know that in the Old Testament, there was this story in the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel was a story about God's people in exile in a place called Babylon, which is present-day Iraq. And the story of Daniel revolves around Daniel and a few of his friends who end up in the palace, in the courts of the king of Babylon. And the drama and the tension of the book of Daniel, at least the several first chapters, comes in the fact that there is this posturing and this competition for who is going to be the most important in the eyes of the king. And Daniel and his friends dominate the competition. Over and over again, they show that everyone else who's trying to impress the king with learning and knowledge and special information is not as good as Daniel and his 3 friends. And so over and over again, we are told that they prove that God is there and he is protecting them and he is providing for them, that he's giving them this information, and that they are declaring with the way that they're acting that God has the ability to work. Their God, our God, has the ability to work. And not just work, but that he has the ability to work for his people and provide for his people and protect his people. Because at this point, Daniel and his friends, they were functionally slaves. They had no freedoms. They had no right to do whatever they wanted to do. And yet God provides for them and gives them exactly what they need at all of these different moments. To the point where the king in the middle of Daniel says this: all of the wise men, the magi of my kingdom, are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able. There's something special about God's people because the Spirit, and he doesn't even know because he's not a Jewish person. He just says the Spirit of the holy gods is in you. There is something unique and special about God's people in the book of Daniel. Now, here's the other thing, though, is that when God's people went into exile in Babylon, they went into exile and they took with them all of the Bible that they had at that point. All of the prophecies, all of the teaching, all of the instruction, so that they carried it with them. And in those prophecies was this promise that all of the stuff that the Babylonians saw from Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were like kids' magic tricks compared to what was going to happen one day in the future. That prophetically, yes, it's really cool that a guy falls asleep in a lion's den and doesn't get eaten. Yes, it's really cool that these men get thrown into a fire and they survive. Sure, that's neat. It is nothing compared to what happens when God's final show arrives. And it seems like that prophecy and that truth and the way that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego lived in Babylon left a mark, at least with some people. Because now, here we are in the story, hundreds of years later, and these men show up, and they say, we've been looking for this king of the Jews. We knew he was coming. We knew there was a promise. And they say, and we saw a star arose, which in the ancient world was actually a fairly common sign of a new dynasty being established. They said, we knew that we should be looking for a king coming from Israel. All the prophecies we were handed, they pointed this out. And now we saw this star, and so here we are to come and worship and meet this king. So they come and they have this back and forth with Herod. And then they go on their way, and the star it does something that most stars don't normally do. Now, right, you can point to a star and it can be in one direction in the sky. They saw a star rise. They were in the east and they saw a star rise and they followed that star to a city. But normally stars don't kind of hover in front of you and then say, in 500 feet, turn left. In 600 feet, turn right. At the next stop sign, make a left. Your destination will be on the right. But this star does exactly that. The star moves from being this kind of thing in the sky far away to being a source of navigation, guiding them not just to a region, but guiding them to an actual house where they meet Jesus. And it says that they are led to Jesus, and they worship, and they give him gifts. That's who they were. That's what's going on. But there is another question that I think we have to ask about these magi. Why does God include them? What is God doing with the magi that they're a part of this story? Like I said, is this just one of these extra random bits of information that we get in the Bible? Or some people would say, they would almost actually use the Magi as an example for why the Bible is actually hard for you to trust. Because there are multiple gospel accounts, and in each one of the gospel accounts, the story of the beginning of the gospel is different. Some of them jump into poetry, some of them jump into the ministry of Jesus later. And in Matthew's gospel, we have the story about these wise men showing up. In Luke's gospel, we have a different story. We have a story of these shepherds that show up. Now, some people would hear that and they say, see, you really can't trust this whole gospel thing. It was just random people saying different stories, kind of all jammed together. But what we see in Matthew's gospel is that God is really declaring with these wise men coming, with these magi coming, that he is including a much larger segment of the world than maybe we would have thought. And he's saying something different in Luke's gospel, because in Luke's gospel, by including the shepherds, who are the lowest kind of social pocket in Jewish society. And now, when you take them both together, you get actually a pretty unique picture of what God is doing. Have you ever had a problem with one of your eyes? Where, you get something in it and you had to close it, or maybe you had surgery and you could only use one eye, or something happened. You would know that our eyes are actually not identical images in both. That if you, and you don't have to do this right now because everybody looks silly, kind of pointing and closing one eye and then opening the other. But if you want to, in private, you point at something and you close one eye and then you switch eyes, you will say, I'm pointing at something different. It's not pointing in the exact same location, because it turns out that each eye is not giving you an exact copy of the same image, but that each eye is offering a slightly different perspective on purpose. Because it turns out that it's not that you have two eyes just in case one gets poked so that you have a backup, but that you have two eyes that give you the ability to see the world in 3D. If you've ever had to cover one eye and then kind of navigate, there's a good chance that maybe you bumped into something. Every young guy that I've ever met, at some point in his life, whether he wants to admit it or not, tries to catch something when it's too late for him actually to see how fast the ball is coming. And so if it's a baseball and it's white, or maybe it's a frisbee because it's glow in the dark, or one of those Nerf footballs that are glow in the dark, and you think, I can catch this because I can see it. And the best thing that happens is that you miss the catch. What's also very likely, though, is that you get hit in the face because you are trying to catch something and you don't have enough details to actually understand the world that you're seeing, because it turns out that depth perception is a magical gift. And that's what's going on in this passage. that we actually are given two different stories so that when we look at Jesus, we have a greater understanding of everything that he's trying to teach us. That by seeing the fact that he invites the Magi and God brings a star to do all of these weird things, to lead the Magi economically at the top of the social ladder, culturally outside, these were elites. These were people who didn't think like everybody else. Whatever it was, if we were a church in Kansas, they would say these Magi were the coastal elites. It would be that kind of thing. And then the shepherds they're shepherds, they're actually in the middle of a shift watching the sheep. You know, I've known farmers who stink from walking through a barn. I've known garbage men. I've never given a garbage man a hug while he was on duty in his coveralls. And yet we're told that these shepherds, they show up on duty. Now, when we step back and we use both eyes to look at these stories, what we're told is that God is including people from across every cultural, every economic, every normal worldly division that we can imagine, that God's good news is good news for all of them. And when we focus just on this passage in Matthew, what we see is that the wise men are included so that we can understand that there is no social status that is too established, too high up, too, kind of elite to not be invited and not be challenged by Jesus. And I say both. I say invited and challenged by Jesus. Because actually we see two versions of what we could call the well-read and the well-fed. That people who had all of the economic and cultural and educational attainment you could ever want. We actually see two competing visions, even in this passage in Matthew. One in the wise men, who take all of their learning, all of their resources, and it causes them to go hundreds of miles, maybe thousands of miles, to find and follow Jesus and worship him. To take everything they have and submit it to God. But we see another version of the well-fed and the well-read in Herod, who instead of taking what he has and submitting it to God, he uses what he has to put obstacles up to people finding God's plans. Now, I just want to give you like a hint. That would be a perfect opportunity. That's a softball down the middle for a preacher to talk about financial generosity, right? I could just say, hey, everybody, let's talk about the wise men, how they went far and wide. They went out of their way to bring their best. And we could do that, but we've done that. We've actually talked about generosity even in the series. And as a church, we talk about generosity, and our church is a generous place. And so I actually don't want to talk about what the wise men bring to Jesus. I want to talk about actually what the wise men need from Jesus, if that's okay. Now, I skipped a slide, and so I'm going to skip the slide really quickly here. If you were wondering, and there's no sheet, but gospel stories are intentionally different, not accidentally different. But let's keep going. What do the educated and the affluent not have to offer, but need? What do they need? Now, let's be honest. Every single person in this room has some perspective and opinion and assumptions about what it means to be rich. We just do. We culturally think that way. To be elite, to be well off. However you would say it politely, all of us have some vision in our head of what that means. And some of us would say they don't really need much at all. They have everything that they need. I mean, they have probably good jobs, right? Middle class, upper middle class, upper class people, they have good jobs. They have good educations. They are well connected socially. They have beautiful homes. They have lives that people admire. They really don't need that much, do they? They've got the careers and the connections. They already have everything they actually need. Now, here's part of the problem. Most of us always think of the rich, no matter how much we actually make, the rich as somebody else far above us, which actually is entirely untrue. So for instance, just in Delaware, if your family together makes more than $115,000 a year, you are above the top 20% of all people. Now you say, well, we don't make that much, so therefore we're not rich. Let's zoom out. If you and your family make more than $65,000 a year, you're actually richer than 85% of the world's population. And to be above half of the world's population, you have to sit around $20,000 a year. Which means that I would wager that every single working person in here is above that halfway mark. That all of us, in comparison to the rest of the world, are actually rich. Now, let me ask you a question. I bet you have homes that you love. Rent or own, you have a home that you love. That you have family that care for you and provide for you. I bet you that many of you have educations or are pursuing educations. I bet you that many of you have educations that even say, well, I didn't get this extra degree. You probably would admit that it's more than what everyone in the history of the world's had before you. I bet that you have family that love you. Let me ask you, if you had all of those things and you didn't have Jesus, would you have everything that you need? See, here's the thing. There is no amount of riches. There is no amount of stuff. There is no education, no job, no resources that can make up for what can be found in Jesus alone. Which means that there are a lot of people who, yes, they have careers. They have great bank accounts. They have great homes and good friends. They have lives that lots of people will admire. But if they are not spiritually alive and connected to Jesus, then they are deeply in need. There's no amount of money that can ever substitute for a life with God. Okay, now there's another way that sometimes we look at people, and instead of saying, well, they have everything they need, we look at people who are well-fed, well-read, and maybe in Delaware, kind of that, and Philadelphia, and just like kind of that social family, those families that are connected to families that are connected to families, and you went to the right school, and you have the right background, well-bred, we can say. The other way that we look at people who have quote-unquote a lot is that they're the bad guys. They're the villains. I mean, if you want to watch a Disney movie right now, any Christmas movie right now, easily and obviously, who will be the bad guy? It's a banker. It's a businessman. Let's go back to It's a Wonderful Life. It is the rich that are the villains of the story. And there is a cultural narrative that says that if you have a certain amount of money, inevitably you're the bad guy. You're the villain. Which is why some of us, even though we make a lot of money, we say to ourselves, well, I'm not rich because I don't want to be a bad guy, and so I can't be the bad guy. And we kind of trick ourselves. But there is this cultural idea that there are rich and they don't deserve the gospel because they're terrible. Maybe we wouldn't say that out loud, but maybe we just don't like those kinds of people who have certain things that we don't have, who don't seem to struggle for the things that we seem to struggle for. And here's the thing, over and over and over again in the life of Jesus, he does not hate on the rich the way that society would tell some of us that we ought to hate on the rich. Over and over and over again, you know what he does? He includes them. Here in this story with the Magi, God sends a star to direct these well-educated elites to come and worship Jesus. And we can go forward where Jesus says, Zacchaeus, who has more money than everybody else, where nobody in the society likes him, I'm having dinner with you tonight, Zacchaeus. We could go to the fact that Jesus, when he is buried, we're told, in the tomb of a rich man. And so for some of us culturally, if we think the gospel cannot be for people with resources, that once you get to a certain point, after that God says, no, you're not invited here, that is not the gospel story. So let me just say this. If you want to be next to Jesus, you have to understand and get used to the fact that he is happy to be with stinky shepherds and perfumed magi. That's the Jesus that we worship. And if you don't understand that all of those people, all of us as people, are needy, you're going to misunderstand just how big the gospel story really is. Because in the Christian story, there is no such thing as a villain who can't find redemption. In the Christian story, there are always misfits that are somehow included. In the Christian story, there is no sinner whose sins are too scandalous for them to be forgiven. And that's not just true hypothetically, that's true right now today. Maybe you look at your life and you feel like you're an outsider. Maybe you look at your life and you would know, you don't even know that word sinner, but it just kind of hits you in the heart in the wrong way, and you hate the idea that that's you, but you honestly, if you looked at the things that you're doing in your life and you said clearly, somebody could call me the villain. That could be me. There is forgiveness for you in Jesus Christ. There is grace for you in Jesus Christ. There is no one too scandalous, too shocking to be included in Jesus' story. Right now, that's true for you. He's able to provide for what you need. Now, a little bit ago, Keith read from Isaiah 60. And Isaiah 60, it's a really interesting passage. And I don't know how many of us actually even kind of link it up with this story of the wise men. But this idea, right? Arise and shine, for your light has come and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. That there is this light shining. And it says that these people riding camels are going to come from all of these places, and they're going to bring gifts. It says of gold and frankincense. I mean, that is amazing, this kind of prophetic future that Isaiah 60 gives us. And these wise men, that's exactly what they had. God put a star in the sky to lead them and guide them and show them where they were supposed to go. But today, things are different. Today, God doesn't normally kind of give us this celestial GPS like that. Today, God uses his people. He uses his people to lead and guide those who are seeking him. That means that you are the star that God is putting in someone else's life to illuminate their steps to come and meet with Jesus. Now, I'll give you a little bit of editorial in my writing process. At one point in this sermon, I was actually going to say, you are the camel that will carry people to the presence of Jesus. And I realized kind of early on that which would you rather be, everybody? Would you rather be a star or a camel? And I thought that's kind of no contest. But you are the star that really is meant to illuminate people's path to God. Jesus says that. He calls his church a city on a hill. He talks about lighting a light, and he says, why would you light a light and then put it under a table so that nobody can be illuminated by it? He says his people are meant to be a light for those to find their way into the presence of God. And sometimes we forget just how important God's people are. There's not this other plan that he's using. It's us. This is how he works. It is wild and wonderful and overwhelming. And it's not that anymore people have to go to one place and find him in one place. What we're told is that God sends his church out. He sends us on purpose. He puts us where he wants us to be, so that rather than people all having to go to one place, that we, as his people, are illuminating all of these different communities. Which means that good news, you guys, because good news is not just the building, good news is the people. God has put you here to illuminate the steps of many people. Because there are literally tens of thousands of what we could call modern magi, people who have money and status and education. Culturally, from a world's perspective, they have everything going for them. But what they need more than anything else is to come into the presence of Jesus Christ. And that's us. Charles Spurgeon challenged his church at one point, and he said this, it hit me. He said, the church is the hope of the world. That God's people are how God is working out his salvation and his plans and bringing the gospel into people's lives. But if I'm honest, all of that when I was growing up in the church was a burden. I felt guilty. I didn't know how to respond. Whenever I talked about Jesus, I felt like I was worried that I was going to come across as a jerk, that I was going to come across unknowing. I was petrified that I wasn't going to be able to respond in the right way, that I wasn't going to have all of the answers for people. And so I was terrified that I could never do everything, and so I did nothing. And maybe there are some of you that feel that same feeling. Sam is talking about evangelism, and he's talking about sharing the gospel. He's talking about us being the light. And you're terrified that I'm going to say, you all go out, and you're thinking for some reason to say, well, actually, technically, not me. Listen, we have no desire to be a church driven by guilt or shame. That's just not why we're here. That's not how we work. We want to invite you to participate in the work of the kingdom. We also want to give you the tools so that you can feel confident in the work that you're doing. As a church, it's not just that we do one thing, but that we really are trying to build ourselves in such a way that we're thinking about reaching people and caring for people. that we put on events like we did the other night where we had the Charlie Brown Christmas party. And you say, how is it possible that the Charlie Brown Christmas party was an evangelistic event? Well, it showed people that had never been here. And I would guess that more than half the people that came to that party had never been in our building before. And they said, wow, I didn't know that there was a church here. And there were all of our people talking and welcoming and inviting them, showing them what is called biblical hospitality, which in many ways is one of the most important things that you can do to illuminate someone's path. But we didn't have the University of Delaware professor stand up at the end and pull, is it Linus, who in the Charlie Brown Christmas special reads the Gospel of Luke, right? We didn't do that. And so you say, well, then it's not really, it's not an evangelism. Well, yes, in some ways, it's not just that we want people to be around the church. We want people to be around Jesus. And we need to carve out space so that they can interact with Jesus and his word and his teaching. That's ultimately the goal. How do we do that? Well, as a church, what we're going to do is we're going to actually just create a pattern where we are putting on classroom experiences. That sounds weird, whatever I could say. We're going to have meals and small group discussions for people who are trying to figure out what they believe about Jesus, who are trying to figure out what it means, what it would mean to find hope and rest and life in him. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do it through a series of video classes that we found from a nonprofit in the UK called Alpha. That it really, there are a whole bunch of them, but we're going to take the first 6, which walk through finding life and meaning and engaging with Jesus and engaging with faith, and we're going to walk through them. And what we need you to do is pray about saying to someone, come with me, I'm going to go and sit through and we're going to talk about faith and meaning and purpose in our life. Would you like to do that with me? I want to show you just a quick video that maybe explains Alpha a little bit better than I did. And then we'll wrap up. So you want to turn that? 8, I think, was the volume.
Or challenges. We share moments, good or bad, big or small. Because what we share matters. We have the chance to share something incredible, the hope that has transformed our lives. And today, more than ever, people are searching for hope, for connection, for meaning. The life we've experienced in Jesus is available to our friends and neighbors, and it's easier to share than we might think. Over the next few weeks, we're running Alpha, an opportunity to share Jesus with friends, family, and colleagues in person or online. Each week, we'll connect with each other, watch a short video, and have time to discuss our thoughts and questions without needing to have all the answers. All it takes is a simple invitation. Share life, faith, hope, Jesus. Who will you invite?
God doesn't use celestial bodies anymore. But each of us might be the star that God puts in somebody's life to lead them to the feet of Jesus. Let's pray. Lord, I'm thankful for this story. I'm thankful for this season, for these opportunities. God, would you remind us that there are so many things going on and it's so busy and we can be so distracted and overwhelmed with all the stuff of life. But Lord, there are some things that are so much more important, so much more vital. They are unseen and yet they are the most significant. God, I pray that for anyone here who doesn't know what to do with you, who doesn't know how to engage with you, who feels that they're far away.